Hi everybody, I am the Fattest Leech, and either welcome if this is your first time or welcome back if you are one of the crazy ones that keeps returning. I love you all and appreciate you all. This video is going to be a very free-form video discussing George's story, The Glass Flower. This is not going to be a typical review, like book review style. We're not just going to give thumbs up or thumb downs on a few plot points and then close the book and move on. We're going to get a little bit deeper than that, talk about a little bit of definitions for a few things and then the background of them. I have this entire story with all of my notes plus some on my blog page. It's under the book club tab, and I have at this point, I think I have about 26 stories that are done. It's one of the stories in the list, but it's all right there. So if you want to sort of follow along with these notes, you can. If you just want to listen along, you can do that as well. So I am Leech. You can call me Leech. I am the one that over the years on different fandom platforms has always talked about George's old writing style and his old stories and how that compares to Song of Ice and Fire, or even compares to itself in something I call Martinworld. I've read all 80 plus of George's available stories, and while it's overwhelming, but it's a really fun thing to do. So I hope you keep coming back for more Martinworld George discussions. Okay. So on to The Glass Flower. Published in 1986, this novelette digs into the questions of what is the cyclical nature of life and death. When you play the game of mind, the results could give you just what you ask for or not. So be careful what you ask for. Some of the questions that it brings up are things like, should the cycle be manipulated in the first place, even if you have the power to do so? How does this play with human autonomy compared to the worship of a god? This story is one of Martin's last in his Thousand Worlds universe. He finished this story. He was about to write another story called Avalon. Avalon is a planet, and on that planet is that's where the Academy of Human Knowledge was established. That is the Academy of Human Knowledge, started by Cloronimus. That's essentially what we call the Weirwood Network, or even a little bit of like the Citadel. So the Weirwood Network and the Citadel and Ice and Fire, they're sort of going to merge anyway. So that's the Academy of Human Knowledge. It was started by a character that in all of the Thousand Worlds universe, we never actually get to meet the original one. In this story, we get to see a fake a fake character. His real name is Joachim Cloronimus. Cloronimus is what you're going to hear him referred to a lot. The Cloronimus we meet in this story has already body swapped with the real Cloronimus, and so he's the protagonist in the story. And then the main character, who happens to be an antagonist, that's Cyrene of Lilith and Ash. She is the one that is in control of all of this game of mind and body swapping that we're about to read. So for me, George finishing this story, The Glass Flower, and then writing, he said he got about 100 or 200 pages into Avalon, which is about 3 students that go to Avalon to go attend the Academy of Human Knowledge. He put that story down because that's when he started with his writing of A Song of Ice and Fire, with specifically the visions of Bran finding the pups in the snow. So I would like to know like how his thought process went, going from one to the next to the other, to Bran. Yeah, so the the Academy of Human Knowledge is related to green seeing means enlightenment. That's another page I have that is a combination of, Martinworld and Song of Ice and Fire and all sorts of existentialist ideas, and I will link that in the show notes. Let's see. So, from a few comments by George regarding the glass flower from one of his Dream Songs books. The rest of the book I will fill out with originals. I knew lots of writers who loved chess, so here we go now with the chess. Then he talks about chess and how he wrote a few stories because he played chess. He did the scheduling of chess tournaments. And then he goes on to say, the glass flower has a sadder distinction. It marked the last time I ever returned to my old science fiction future history. Chloronimus was one of the touchstone names in that history, along with Stephen Cobalt Northstar, Erica Storm Jones, and Tomo and Wahlberg. I thought it was past time that I brought one of my mythic figures onto stage. So happy. The glass flower appeared in Asimov's in September of 1986. Except for Avalon, the abortive novel I began before getting caught up in the Game of Thrones and Doorways, I have not since visited any of my 1,000 worlds. Will I ever return? I make no promises. Maybe, but that's the best I can do. Definitely maybe. Okay, fine. Just give me the little bit of Avalon. I'll be good. Okay. So this is how George gets into his game of mind, which is what we have here in the glass flower. This is not a new topic or plot device that George uses by far. It's in so many of his stories. In the glass flower, George literally creates an artifact table, and it's a table, and this is the location of the game. This table is called the Siege Perilous, which is taken from Arthurian legend as the seat at Arthur's round table in which only the chosen knight can sit. It is a favorite. It's so much of a favorite, as we will see in the story. George even used it for Dragonstone because it's something that's associated with dragons in his world. To siege is to take control of the chessboard, so to speak, the pawns and the players in this game of war. When we see Sweet Robin Aaron having his seizures, that's another type of siege. Something is going on, like a game of mind, so to speak, is going on with Sweet Robin in the game Sivas when Tyrion plays it with with Aegon. Just call him Aegon right now. Whatever you think his real name is. That's also a chess game across time, and Tyrion is sort of messing with Aegon's head in that scene. I think we can all agree on that. And it's all for war purposes. George did say at the end of 2019, when he was in one of his Chicago interviews, that Song of Ice and Fire is a war story at heart. So why do I keep saying that this is a chess game across time? Well, one of George's time travel stories, again, the theme is war and how to prevent it and how to try to steer it or direct it. In his story Under Siege, which was just written just a year before The Glass Flower, the quote is, Veronica begins to put the pieces back in the box. This Feaborg business is kind of chess game too, she says conversationally. A chess game across time. Us and the Swedes against the Russians and the Finnish nationalists. What move do you think we should make against Kronstadt? So yeah, a chess game across time, and it's all about war. I will say that also at the end of 2019, I did have a chance to meet George up in New York City for the Starport signing. Read Starport, it's excellent. It's that graphic novel that's up there, filled with all sorts of ice and fire-isms. But I had him sign my original The Glass Flower. I had to have an original copy. I didn't bring it down, I should have. Um, and I wrote the story out of my blog, but very quickly I had him sign it, and he was very impressed that somebody even had this story still, and that I read it and I loved it as much as I do. And where is it at? So he, pick it up here. So he signed it for me, and that's not Cyrene, but that's the cover. And he told me, he was like, "Oh, old school, very good, an important one, a good, that's a good thing to read." So he has some admiration for this story of his, especially if he says it's a good thing to read. Some things that this story will show readers rather distinctly, as well as other George stories like Armageddon Rag and Fever Dream and For a Single Yesterday and A Song for Laia and several other stories, is that Martin is well adept in handling the many aspects of slavery. This is, for good reason, a sensitive subject to us humans, but we have to be able to get to a point where, if we're discussing George's works, you have to understand how he handles slavery. He's not sympathetic to it at all, but he doesn't handle it one size fits all. He's not rewriting the American South. Not even so much in Fever Dream as you might think. That has to do with mental slavery a lot. So there's the bodily and mental slavery that he is always dealing with. And it shows up different ways. So, and sometimes when you think somebody is freeing a slave, they're not actually freeing a slave. They might be breaking those chains physically, but what's going on in place of that is their mental chains are being forged and locked in with this character, and he's just like switching one thing out for another. So, but that'll be a whole other video on its own. So why am I talking about slavery? We'll see it in this story, but other readers that know a bit of Martin's work like to cite Fever Dream as the slavery story, but I would also count this as one just equally as strong of telling the various contrasts of owner and the owned, perfection and corruption, and faith and religion to higher knowledge. Even in Fever Dream, Damon Julian brutally mocks and criticizes the humans for keeping slaves bodily, while he hypocritically keeps slaves mentally. It's the existential choice that George gives Dany, and when she's at the House of the Undying Ones, is the cup of ice, the cup of fire. So she essentially takes the cup of fire. And then George, another quote from George, "I did consider in the very early stages not having the dragons in there. And one of the Targaryens symboled to be the dragons, but I did play with the notion that maybe it was like a psionic power, that it was pyrokinesis, and that they could conjure up flames with their minds. I went back and forth. My friend and fellow fantasy writer Phyllis Eisenstein actually was the one who convinced me to put the dragons in, and I dedicated the third book to her, and I think it was the right call. But even before then, or even during then, in George's his pitch letter, which I have that on my blog, and we'll link it in the show notes. Even in that pitch letter, George says that Dany's going to be able to have mental control to be able to bend people to her will, and he's talking. He mentions it with the Dothraki in particular, but yeah, the way it plays out in the story is kind of like scary foreshadowing for how Dany's gonna go. Let's see, what else? So then let's just get on into the story. It starts with Cyrene in her point of view, and she's with this flower, and she says, "Once I was just a girl in the first flush of my true youth. A young boy gave me a glass flower as a token of his love. The ancient glass flower's art is lost and forgotten, but the unknown artisan had fashioned my flower and remembered it well. It was frozen in a crystal for eternity. It was surrounded by a crown of 6 wide drooping leaves. It was as if an alchemist had been wandering through a garden one day, and in a moment of idle play, he transmuted an especially large, beautiful flower into glass." So on my blog, you'll see I have a lot of these things underlined or highlighted because these are carryover Martinworld terms that we see in Ice and Fire, because again, that's, we're kind of here for Ice and Fire. So the glass artist is described very similar to those who know the secrets of soul-drinking Valyrian steel. This is not like the Whisper Jewels of George's Martinworld. This is something this is an item that stands alone. So in addition to crowns being the mind control crystal worn by a dragon, the wall in the north is also a sign of a controlling ice dragon or a great other. So we also see this crystal crown that the Faith of the Seven wear, the High Septon, and the Faith of the Seven wears. That is part of that religious mind control. And Dany, it started off with Aegon and his sisters, but Dany's going to do it too. After whatever is dealt with Cersei and the Faith, there's going to be some sort of absorbing of the Faith in with Daenerys. Just like what had to happen with Aegon the Conqueror. He had to accept them. Even if he didn't fully convert himself, he had to accept them because in some ways, especially back then, the Faith of the Seven had the real control. So what Cersei is doing is setting them up a bit for that control, but she's also arming them. So we have this weird balance of faith and the militant that's going to be back in Dany's arc again. Just like Bacalon. So what else do we have? And then we get to her castle. And at very last, in my castle built on stilts, in my house of pain and rebirth, where the game of mind is played, amid the swamps and stinks of Crow and Denny, far from all humanity, save those few lost souls who seek us out, it was there to my glass flower. So she's had her glass flower through all of these body changes that she's had. She's had it for a long time. I don't know how old she is. I can't remember if it's ever really described in here, but the body we meet Cyrene in this story is her 5th body, and she's talked about how some of her previous bodies have grown old. So yeah, there's probably a little bit of that control, as we see with Melisandre, that R'hllor has over her with her, possibly like her ruby, manipulating time, keeping her looking young. But this is, so part of where she comes from is a place called Ash, and from Lilith. Those are her bodies, the origin of some of her bodies. The Ash is a river in A Song of Ice and Fire in Essos that runs through the Vale of Shadows. There's a ton of connections between Cyrene and where she is, her type of building, her structure she's in, and Ashai and Ashai by the Shadows and things like that, where the dragons come from. So she comes from Ash. Ash is a planet here. Ash is a river in A Song of Ice and Fire. The corpse city of Stegai is located along the ash in the heart of the shadow. So that's like directly from there. The castle on its stilts is akin to Drogo's pyre, which is where that's Dany's real first step in becoming the stallion that mounts the world, or the mare, I guess you could say, that mounts the world, where she's going to be the first, like the greatest cow of all cows. But it's not going to be a guy, it's going to be a female. And then, yeah, so that's also, Drogo's pyre is also where Dany woke her stone dragons, which George has called many times nuclear weapons. So we're back to that war element. And Drogo's spirit blessed her with a warlike sentiment when he gives her that whip and things start cracking open, the shattering stone. This current Crow-en-Denny, that's the planet that we're on right now, this current Crow-en-Denny wasn't always like this. When and we'll hear this a little bit later in the story, but Cyrene is an invader, and she's not the first invader. And during this invasion, these two invasions, they have wiped out, or pretty close to wiped out, the native inhabitants, which are very much like the children of the forest. And they stole their powers from the Crow, and I don't know what you would call the people officially, or the inhabitants officially on Crow-en-Denny, the Crow-en-Dennics. Crow-en-Denna, I don't know. But yeah, they stole this power, these mindlords stole this power from the indigenous and took it as their own. And then Cloronimus arrives. He's a cyborg. He is shining black alloy, and he has dark metal on him. He has duralloy bones. The power bars and flexors were the muscles and the tendons. The intricate patterns of light racing up and down his superconductive neurosystem. His fingers were steel. This is an interesting part. On his right hand, long silver claws sprang rakishly from his knuckles when he made a fist. It's like Wolverine from Marvel Comics. And we know George is a big comics fan, especially Marvel. This is another interesting part about Cloronimus and the way he looks. He was looking at me. His eyes were crystalline lenses set in metal sockets, moving back and forth in some green translucent gel. They had no visible pupils. Behind each implacable crimson iris burned a dim light that gave us a stare as an ominous red glow. Am I that fascinating? He asked. His voice was surprisingly natural, deep and resonant, with no metallic echoes to corrode the humanity of his reflections. So we have all of that description, and all of that in that description, we have a green sight, we have red pupils, we have things that are exactly how Bloodraven is described, and in which we can then infer that, you know, this is a common characteristic that green seers have as well, with the play on words with the green sight. Also the bones, remember, the dark metal armor with its intricate lights. It's also kind of like Rhaegar's armor. Rhaegar was not a typical Targaryen, possibly, unless we learn anything else about him in Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring. Rhaegar possibly is the Targaryen that's not like other Targaryens. So, and then Cloronimus goes on to say, to talk about ancestral metal that runs in the family. So that's a bit like Dawn, like the original ice, possibly, like Valyrian swords. I smiled for him. I'm Jesus Christ. Would you care to meet my apostles? There are so many references to from Cyrene that she is Jesus Christ, that she has this immense God complex in this story. And really, we don't hear that with the animistic green side of the magic and rulers in Westeros. We hear that really from Dany. And a few quotes from that is from A Storm of Swords, where Dany says, "Up here in her garden, Dany sometimes felt like a god living atop the highest mountain in the world. Do all gods feel so lonely?" So this is a description that comes almost straight from the glass flower. The location, being a god, is she lonely? And then in A Dance with Dragons, they start calling her worship. That's one of the titles that Grey Worm gives her. So there's a lot of godliness, goddessness, whatever you want to call it, religious worship that's building around Dany. That even if she doesn't see it herself yet, when she gets back to Meereen, that's what she wants. That's what she's going to crave, and that's what she's going to use. And then we get to this wisdom thing. Another title or name that Cyrene is often called is wisdom. That kind of goes with Dany officially when she is, it's in the first book, and she is wondering how she has all of this genetic memory, and how is she able to figure out that her dragons need fire and intense heat, and how she can manipulate the situation subconsciously. So she is going to be the queen. So she is going to be the Khaleesi, whatever you want to call her, the bride of battle. And as she's starting to realize these things on a subconscious level, she asks, what is this wisdom buried deep in my blood? Oh, here's the quote. It says, or some strange wisdom buried in her blood. Yeah, that's from A Game of Thrones, Dany 6. So there's also several connections to Lilith. I have a page on Lilith. I know it's very postmodern and current feminist ideals that Lilith was demonized because of her being a female through history. That may or may not be true. It doesn't really matter what we think. I'll just say that right now. What matters what parts of history George or any author wants to pull from. So if he likes the story of Lilith being an antagonist, especially if you know any of the history of Lilith with the song Lullaby and her association with vampires, and knowing how George constantly writes vampires into his stories in different ways, he's probably, I mean, especially if you read this story, he's pulling on that darker side to Lilith than maybe some people are going to be comfortable with. Yeah, and there's Melisandre references in here. And then one of the big power moves why Cyrene is going to allow this Chloronimus to play the game of mind is she wants this immortality. That is what the flower is to her. It's perfection because it's immortal. It's never going to decay. It's never going to wilt or lose petals. That's something she even challenges Chloronimus with in the story. She says, look at this flower. Tell me, what do you see? It's going to be perfect forever. And this Chloronimus, this person's been living in this cyborg body for so long that he says that he's realizing, no, that is not the way of life, the natural way of life, of the natural order of things. There's life and there's death, because from that death, life, recycles and comes again new. Not to Cyrene. Cyrene wants to live forever in perfection, and she wants everything to be her way or no way. And then, this is also another tricky thing that George has written into Song of Ice and Fire that I think a lot of readers just kind of read right past. Is there's reference, the current body that this Cyrene is in is a young girl. She looks exactly like Daenerys, and I think she's about 12. I think her body is about 12 in this story. She has the silver hair, she has the purple eyes, she has all of those classic Valyrian features, and it's even described as her saying that she was genetically made to be this way. So the Targaryens, with their incest, that's controlling genetics. That's a bit like mad scientist-y thing. That's what Cyrene is. That's how we got Valyrians. So, but when Cloronimus says, "You look like a child, like a girl close to puberty, no more," she says, "I am older than my body." "As am I," he said. "The curse of the cyborg wisdom is that parts can be replaced." "Then you are immortal," I challenged him. "In one crude sense, yes. But going back to this, you look like a child," Dany says no less than, I think, 13 times in the story that some version of, "It is true, I am only a young girl and do not know the ways of war." That is a farce. That is Dany playing mind games with whoever she's talking about. She, despite her age, despite her little petite girl frame, she is a war person. Remember that it's in her blood. It's that wisdom in her blood, her Valyrian blood. I mean, Valyrians bred their dragons for war. So, capital D or little d, dragons are bred for war. Yeah, so she wants the immortality, and Cloronimus wants the natural order of things. And then we get to this part. "Interesting," I said. "Contradictory. You came here to me, to Croendeni and its artifact. To the game of mind. Why? This is a place where the dying come, cyborg, in hope of winning life. We don't get many immortals." "I seek a different prize," the cyborg said. "Yes," I prompted. "Death," he told me. "Life, death, life." So, throughout Dany's arc in Ice and Fire, we get a lot of these discussions with her as well. Even small things, like when Dany went from sunlight back to shadow, back to light again. Those are small, little story details, little story idiosyncrasies that George is planting in there, telling and showing the reader what's going to happen in this arc. These descriptions that seem like they're unimportant really are important. So that full quote there is, "The day was warm and cloudless, the sky a deep blue. When the wind blew, she could smell rich scents of grass and earth as her litter passed beneath the stolen monuments of other stolen gods. So as her litter passed beneath stolen monuments, she went from light to shadow and back again." Dany swayed along, studying the faces of the dead heroes and forgotten kings. She wondered if the gods of burned cities could still answer her prayers. So, yeah, that's a bit ominous. So then we get to more things that are very much like the dual nature of Valorism. Melisandre gives a few speeches on the duality there. When in reality, Valorism, they want one extreme. They want the summer that never ends, just like the others want the winter that never ends, because they're associated with an unnatural cold and darkness that comes when they arrive. Neither one of those are good. Both of those are out of balance. What is in the middle is this balance, a little bit of each. You have to have the life and the death and the life, the renewal. And that is what the green tree, green magic element represents in A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, what the two dragons represent in Ice and Fire, they are the extremes, the extreme summer and the extreme winter, but more specifically, more whole in Martinworld is they represent a governmental control, and then I call it like a corporate control. They're separate entities, but at some point they overlap, and they're the extremes. So then we go into some time, like how long she's been there. And she talks about her pride, and then the artifact. Whatever strange instruments it had been, whatever strange alien knowledge it possessed, whatever instinct bid it enter, all lost now, and none of it matters. The White knew. Capital W, White. The White knew something the native sentients had never guessed. They knew the purpose of the artifact, knew how it might be activated. For the first time in 1,000 years, a million, for the first time in a long while, the game of mind was played. And the White changed. It emerged from the artifact as something else, as the first Mind Lord, the first master of life and death, the first Pain Lord, the first Life Lord. The titles are born, worn, and discarded, forgotten, and none of them matter. Whatever I am, the White was first. Okay, so this goes back to an interview, I think it was from 2015, where George actually gave a really good answer on what the definition meant for the title of the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. And he said that it's the two extreme dragons, and that all of the stuff in the middle is just essentially a distraction. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so the question asked was, for people who are not familiar with your work, the series takes place in an imaginary world. There is a struggle for control of the kingdom. This dynastic war is essentially one of three main plot lines. There are other plot lines involving these sort of superhuman characters, and then there's the exiled Targaryen daughter who seeks the return of her ancient throne. Why those main three plot lines? And Siri decided she was going to join. And George answers, well, of course, the two outlying ones, the ones going on north of the wall, and then there is Daenerys Targaryen on the other continent with her dragons, are of course the ice and fire of the title, of the title, A Song of Ice and Fire. The central stuff, the stuff that's happening in the middle in King's Landing, the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, is much more based on historical events, historical fiction, with a fantasy twist. That they're blind to much of the greater and more dangerous threats that are happening far away in the periphery of their kingdoms. And then he goes on and on and on a little bit more, and he kind of reiterates what he says about the Ice Dragon others and the Fire Dragon Dany are the two main threats to the story. You have to deal with the Ice Dragon first before you get with the Fire Dragon. So those are the two Mind Lords. Those are the Mind Lords, the White. Whatever I am, the White was the first. That's why we have to deal with the Ice Dragon others first, and then with Dany. And that's going to be a pretty harsh transition for a lot of people, but it's not our story. So let's talk just a little bit about Crow Dany, the planet that we're on. It's a marsh swamp planet by nature, and the original inhabitants are described to look somewhat like the children of the forest, with the Crowandic, I guess you say it, the Crowandic people having mottled blue-green skin, their slender double-jointed arms. That's pretty much the most physical description we get of them. But they were this race unto themselves with this blue-green mottled skin. not too far off from the type of description that, especially for like the native sentients, the original inhabitants being the children of the forest. So these whites came in and stole this power, this mind game power from the children on this planet, and they took that power and they dialed it up to 21, not even 11, up to 21. They did things with it that the natives didn't even know could be done. And then here comes the very Daenerys-like Cyrene of Lilith and Ash. Here comes, and she says that I am the first. So again, George has been planning this with Dany, whatever's going to happen to her, for a long time, since the 80s, if not earlier. And then there's a lot on this planet that is also like Moat Cailin. Moat Cailin is where the children were. Moat Cailin was supposed to be the safe passage, but we know over time that it has gone to decay. It's like children's, it's like some god came over and knocked down the children's toys, or or something like that. And somebody quote me properly. And yeah, that's because there was something that happened at Moat Cailin with different invasions that ruined the place. And yeah, we have more talk of like the strange wisdoms, and then the Lady of Spears. So that's one with the Unsullied to pay attention to. And then, so we're just over 40 minutes here. So we're gonna go through. So they start to play the game of mind. And then we find out as Cyrene is starting to decide, well, once she has figured out that this Chloronimus is a dupe, is a fake, she wants his immortal body no matter what. So she agrees to let him play in the game. And then we find out that Cyrene has a lover, Car Dorian. He's pretty much Dario. I have quotes in here that compare them together. They even lay in bed and stretch like cats, the exact same way. And Car Dorian is her slaver, meaning Cyrene's not a slave, but he provides slaves to her. And but Cyrene laughs it off. She says that, they come here, they choose to do this, so I can't be responsible for what happens to them. So just like Damon Julian in Fever Dream, who's a vampire, and then we have Cyrene, and then what we see happening with slavery in Meereen. Dany has so-called freed the slaves, but they keep coming back and they keep prostrating themselves at the base of her pyramid. That's what happens here. Cyrene is in a big obsidian pyramid tower. It's on stilts, but it's still a pyramid. And these different creatures come from all over, and they prostrate themselves, and like they put themselves back into slavery. And she's like, well, they did it. And she doesn't understand why they do it, but they did it, and she goes along with it, and she laughs it off. Nice, huh? Then Cyrene talked about the Steel Angels. If anybody knows me, this is your time to drink, because yeah, I have an essay, and I'll link it in the show notes, that the Steel Angels have a god that they call Bacalon the Pale Child. Bacalon is mentioned in Ice and Fire, and so is Sajal, especially in Fire and Blood, is when George really sort of, again, dialed them up a bit. Dany is that little pale child god that carries this big fire sword, and says, beat your plowshares back into swords. Very shortly, that means reject peace and go for war. So Cyrene does the same thing. She talks about the Steel Angels. She says, the Steel Angels, whose worlds lie far from Crow and Denny on the other side of human space, teach their children that strength is the only virtue and weakness only is sin, and preach that the truth of their faith is written large on the universe itself. It is a difficult point to argue. By their creed, I have every moral right to the bodies I take because I am stronger and therefore better and more holy than those born to that flesh. The little girl born in my present body was not a steel angel, unfortunately. Yeah, so I have an essay called The Steel Andal Invasion. It explains how Targs and in the faith, but especially Danny, how they were written to merge at some point, no matter what. And it's another fiery invasion that's coming. Yeah, so again, she starts talking about being a wisdom and about the worship and the faith of the seven. But then part of her investigation into Chloronymus really does point us to the fact that John is going to be the son's son, not Quentin. I know a lot of people are thinking it's Quentin because, you know, he let the dragons loose, and the Martell sigil is a son. He is a son. He is not the son. I have all the essay with all of the book quotes are linked in there, and I will put the link in the show notes here. But there's even information from this story that supports that. Chloronymus shows up. This Chloronymus shows up, and one of Cyrene's apostles tells him that she did an investigation on him, and he is one to watch out for. He is one to avoid. And let's see, yeah, she gets a letter. Let's see, it says, okay, my pet telepath, I said, Sebastian Kale. He's blind and twisted, and I keep him in a big jar, but he has had his uses. He can probe through walls. He has stroked the crystal of your mind, friend, and tripped the binary synapses of your id. His report is a bit cryptic, but admirably terse. I slid it across the desk for the cyborg to read. A haunted labyrinth of thought, the steel ghost, the truth within the lie, life in death, and death in life. He will take everything from you if he can. Kill him now. So that's just a little snippet. Read the whole story to get the full quote, but Chloronymus being the tree person, the green person, up against this fiery Cyrene, and she's been warned about him. That's more along the lines of green seers, probably not Bran because of his physical condition. So it's going to have to be John. John is the son's son, not Quentin. Sorry, Quentin. And then there's a lot of Euron in this story as well. I don't know if I've mentioned it already. There's a lot of Euron in this, the existential mind game horror parts of this story. When they actually go into the different realm to play the game of mind, we see bits of Euron's vision that he has about flying. Euron's not a failed student from Bloodraven for many reasons why. First and foremost, because if Bloodraven really was able to see the future and or control timelines and control people, like so many in the fandom believe, I don't, but many in the fandom believe, there's no way in hell Bloodraven would know this about Euron and then let him go. Euron is associated with the blue trees, not the green trees. He's associated with more of the extreme ice dragon side of the story. And again, the glass flower explains why. And then there's even parts where Cyrene's walking through her big obsidian pyramid, and she is talking about how she says she is younger and prettier than I can ever remember being, even in my first youth on Ash, where a nameless boy gave me a glass flower. I hope to wear this sweet flesh for as many years as I wore the body I was born to. If I dwell here long enough, perhaps the day will come when I can look into the dark mirror and see my own face again. So that pretty much goes directly with a couple of Dani quotes. One from Game, where she's having her wake the dragon dream sequence, which is about waking the dragon in her, that war part in her. But then, which the Cyrene quote and that first Dani quote from A Game of Thrones links directly to A Dance with Dragons Dani 9. In the fighting pits when Drogon lands, she says, in the smoldering red pits of Drogon's eyes, Dani saw her own reflection. So there's this huge, big, black, like obsidian, Valyrian being that's there in front of her, and Dani sees her own self within his fiery pits of his eyes. That is extremely telling. That is not just some girl going up to her puppy that she hasn't seen in a month and, cooing and booping his nose. No, that is telling the readers, showing the readers what's about to happen. And then she goes on and she says, one by one they ascended unto me through wisdom or rebirth, or so they hoped. Again, just as they do to Sejal, and just as they do outside the pyramids of Marine and the pyramids and Seven Times Never Kill Man with the god Bacalon. So then we get to the artifact itself. So we heard about the history of the artifact. The White came and used it first, and then Cyrene played a game of mind with the leading White at the time and ended up taking over the Siege Perilous table. And once she did that, she became the ruler. And when she became the ruler, that's when she had her obsidian pyramid built on the stilts. The stilts were to keep it above the swamps. And she had the table placed in there, the Siege Perilous, the artifact. And then when she sits in it, this is how it's described. High above the swamps, locked in my tower, I prepared for them in the changing chamber. Hard by my unimpressive throne, the artifact. It is not prepossessing a rudely shaped bowl of some soft alien alloy, charcoal gray in color and faintly warm to the touch, with 6 niches spaced evenly around the rim. They are seats, cramped, hard, uncomfortable seats, designed for obviously non-human physiognomies. Seats nonetheless. From the floor of the bowl rises a slender column that blossoms into another seat, the awkward cup that enthrones. Choose the title you like best. Pain Lord, Mind Lord, Life Lord, Giver and Taker, Operator, Trigger, Master. All of them are me, and others before me. The chain rattling back to the White, and perhaps earlier, to the makers, the unknowns who fashioned this machine in the dimness of distant eons. So Aegon the Conqueror had his artifact created, so that we know, but he's a dragon that goes back and back and back. And then the seat that she sits in is like an egg cup that comes up out of the middle of it. And when she sits in there, it starts to fill with like this hot lava type liquid. So it's like a birth. It's almost like a birth or a birth in reverse, depending on which body she gets. Also, let me see if I can get down to it fast enough. The artifact table that's on Dragonstone, um, when we have that first chapter on Dragonstone with Stannis, and he's sitting at the table of the artifact is described the same way, even the same position of the tall seat that Stannis has to sit in. So when Dany comes to Westeros and she goes to Dragonstone and she finds that table for the first time and she sits in that artifact egg cup, that is going to be the dragon return. That is going to be her birth from stone. The stone, you know, this whole stone dragon thing. That is when she is going to be Aegon come again, Aegon the dragon. That's where she's going to do her war planning to invade Westeros. George has, since the beginning, since his outline, he's always described Dany's return to Westeros as an invasion, not a reclaiming or anything nice and sweet like that, but as an invasion. So there's some elements of the Drowned God here. There are some deeper questions or ideas that George was really into at the time, like relativism, a belief that there is no absolute truth, only the truth that a particular individual or culture happen to believe. Hopefully that's enough to tantalize you to read this story. And then, so they go in, they play the game, everybody's in there, they're playing the game. We get to see Euron. We get to see a lot of Euron in here, in the game of mind. You know, and if Euron is contacting Dany mentally in a Game of Thrones, in A Song of Ice and Fire, especially towards the end in A Dance with Dragons, that's where this idea came from, is the game of mind, the glass flower. That is what's happening. So Dany and Euron are going to meet and interact somehow. It's not going to end well for Euron because Dany is Cyrene. Dany is the Mind Lord. Not Euron. As much as he wants to be, he's a baker. Oh, and then when Cyrene is in this game, in this astral plane, playing this game across time, she says, "My armor is black as pit, and the designs worked upon it, black on black, are spiders and snakes and human skulls, with faces of writhe and pain. My long, straight silver sword turns into obsidian, and twists into a grotesquerie of barbs and hooks and cruel spikes. He has a sense of drama, this damned cyborg. No, I say, I will not be cast as evil. I am gold and silver once more, shining, and my plumes are red and blue. I will wear this suit. You wear the suit yourself if you like it so much." So there's a bit of Aryan bright flame in here as well, with his different color sigil and the feathers and his color combination, which also goes again back to the faith of the seven and the different plumage and colors that they wear in their tops of their helm. And then she says, "I will not be cast as evil." This is the same person that was just mocking slavery and mocking people's free will because they worship her, and she takes their bodies no matter what, in minds no matter what. Yeah, so when we have that slavery discussion video, details like this are not going to make people happy. In the game of mind, even more than in life, image and metaphor are everything. So we get into items or symbols that are like the cup of ice, the cup of fire, while in the house of the undying ones, and then even shade of the evening drink. Shade of the evening drink is also something that George has used earlier in Windhaven. It's a shorter scene, but shade of the evening trees are their own thing, their own species. They have their own function. So we go through, they play these games. Green seeing, we find out more and more that green seeing means enlightenment. And there's even some examples of Azor High and Shadow Babies and the Corpse Queen, Night's King's Corpse Queen. That's a mouthful. So all of this stuff is to say that if we read George's older stories, we can see the route he is intending to take in A Song of Ice and Fire. It doesn't have all of the answers, but we at least can see the pavement there. We can see the road, and we have a better idea of where it's going. Nothing should be a shock to us in Ice and Fire anymore at all. So when Bran is made the new leader, I don't think he's going to be king. There's going to be a whole bunch of societal changes. He's not going to necessarily be king. That has happened 100 times in his different stories. When Jon has to fight Ramsay, that has happened before in many of his stories. When Dany accepts her Targaryen words of fire and blood, that has happened before in many stories. The Dany archetype is always very much the same. Even if there are little splinters into like the more minor or secondary or tertiary fire characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, they're all there. They all come from the same master seed. So in the end, they go back to, they play the game, they do the switch, Cyrene gets her immortal body, and then she starts to, that means that this new Chloronimus is now in this little girl's body, and Chloronimus can now do natural things. They talk about it in the book, like she'll have sex, she'll get her period, this new little girl Chloronimus is going to dismantle the obsidian pyramid and build her own castle on the swamps out of like sticks and earth and leaves and things like that. And Cyrene is like, you're gonna get bugs and that's gonna decay. And this new Cyrene little girl, this new Chloronimus little girl says, well, that's just the nature of things. That is how things have to be. Life, death, life. That is the cycle. And the more Cyrene is in this, with her, the transition happens actually pretty quickly. Almost like minute by minute, the more she's in this immortal cyborg body, she starts to change and just like really accept it. She really likes the feeling so far of being able to magnify her eyes and look at things and look at details, and she's starting to absorb other people's memories. Yeah, it's a little bit like what Arya goes through in the House of Black and White, and she starts to lose her own identity pretty quickly, and we're left with the feeling that she's going to fly off, she's going to do whatever, she's going to be her mind lord left over in some other planet somewhere, and that nature is taking back over on Crow and Denny in The Glass Flower, that nature is taking back over, and that's the way things are set to right, you know. There's and then the topic of the glass flower was there, or it comes up again. So to quote this one last part, it says, she understood, she accepted. So you'll play the game of mine forever, she said, and I will never die? That's Cyrene asking. You will die, I pointed out, most certainly. Chloronimus is immortal. And Cyrene of Ash? Her too, yes. What will you do? She asked me. I went to the window. The glass flower was there in its simple wooden vase, its petals refracting the light. Again, the seven, the wall. Its petals refracting the light. I looked up at the source of the light, the brilliant sun of Croendeni burning in the clear midday sky. I could look straight into it now, focus on the sunspots and the flaming towers of its prominences. I made a small conscious adjustment to the crystal lenses of my eye, and the empty sky was full of stars. More stars than I had ever seen before, more stars than I could possibly have imagined. So again, it's the end of her story, just like at the end of Dany's story in A Dance with Dragons. Dany's out there on this plane, and the stars are there, and they're talking to her. So that's not something that's just brought on because Dany's thirsty. That is something George deliberately put in there, and it was going to happen no matter what, because this has to happen to Dany. This is part of her transition. And then to continue on, it says, more stars than I could possibly have imagined. Do, I said, still gazing up at the secret star fields visible to me alone. They brought to mind my obsidian magic. There are worlds I've never been to, I told my sister twin, father, daughter, enemy, mirror image, whatever she was. There are things I don't yet know, stars that even now I cannot see. What will I do? Everything, to begin with, everything. And then a bug comes in the window and the curtain closes. A few things happen and the curtain closes. So, yeah, the nature of life is returning. There's no more bondage for the new gamesmen. The only way that Dany can come out at the end and not be an antagonist in this story is if she gives up her glass flower, if she gives up her crown, if she rejects all of that stuff and then goes from the fire and blood to the green. I don't think George is going to do that. He has already said that she has accepted her family words, and that is what is going to happen moving forward. We're in the third phase, the third act of Ice and Fire, so it's going to tumble pretty quickly. He's past all of his knots and bumps and things like that, and since he draws so very much on his older stories, and he's known since 91 when he started writing this, the end game for his main characters, I think we're going to start to, I think we're going to get the last two books, you know, a little more closer together than maybe like a 10 or 11 year gap than we've already had. He knows where the story's going. He has his own source material that he himself says he draws from. This is not something I'm making up. My front page, the front page of my blog, has several quotes from George where he says that he takes things from his writing, his past, and reuses them. So I have faith. So I know this is a lot. We're just over an hour now. If you are still here, thank you so much for hanging on. I might do a live stream, you know, with some co-hosts in the future. If I do, I will link it here. But in the meantime, I'm going to get this video up. I hope that it encourages you to read the story, like it, share it, leave me messages, you know, do whatever. Let's keep the conversation going up to and even after we get The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. So thank you for hanging on this long, and I welcome all dream singers, readers of Martinworld in general. And until next time, you guys have a great, great day.